The lien was already on my gate when I came home. Yellow paper. Red stamp. My 68-year-old front door shaking in the wind like it had been slapped. I stopped dead in the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots, and stared at my own house like it had turned against me. A deputy stood by the mailbox with a clipboard, and behind him, Melissa from the HOA wore that tight little smile people use right before they ruin your day. She held up a folder and said, loud enough for the whole street to hear, "You're not compliant, Walter. This property is now under review." I looked at the lien notice, then at the house I had paid for, repaired, and lived in for nearly 4 decades. My hands went cold, not because I was scared, because I understood exactly what she was trying to do. She wasn't finding me. She was building a paper trail to take my home. What she didn't know was that I had seen this move before. I served 20 years in the Army, and I learned one thing the hard way. When someone with a smile starts moving papers instead of furniture, they're planning a fight. Melissa took a step closer, heels clicking on my driveway, and tapped the lien with one manicured finger. "You can sign the compliance agreement now, or we can let the board proceed." I didn't sign anything. I didn't raise my voice. I just opened the front gate, walked past her, and smelled fresh cut grass, hot asphalt, and the faint chemical sting of the black sealant I'd put on the cracked walkway myself last month. Every inch of that place had my sweat in it. Every board, every nail, every debt I had already paid. "Then proceed," I said. Her smile flickered, just for a second. Inside, I set my keys down on the same oak table my wife and I had bought secondhand 32 years ago, and I stared at the folder she'd left jammed in my door. The first page was a violation. The second was a fabricated inspection note. The third was a deadline. For sale language, dressed up like routine paperwork. That was the part that made my jaw lock. I called my daughter first. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear dishes in the background. I told her one sentence. "They're trying to steal the house." Silence. Then, "Dad, what do you need?" Not sympathy, not panic. That was my girl. She knew the difference. I told her to bring the deed copy from my file box and meet me at the county records office before it closed. Then I called my old Army buddy Ray, the one who now worked property cases downtown, and asked him a simple question. "How fast can we prove a lie?" "Depends," he said. "Who's lying?" "The HOA." He actually laughed once. Short and sharp. "Then we start with the paper." I looked back out the window at Melissa still standing by the curb, talking into her phone like she already owned the place. She didn't know my late wife kept every payment receipt. She didn't know I'd already photographed the lien notice before anyone could misplace it. And she definitely didn't know the county office had flagged a previous complaint against the same board for forged enforcement records. I slid the folder into my bag, locked the door, and felt something in me go still. Not calm. Colder than that. Focused. Because once you make an old man prove ownership, you better be ready for what else he proves. And by sunset, I was going to make Melissa regret putting her name on my property. Wet paper and stale coffee smell filled the county records office while I spread the folder across the desk and watched Melissa's smile die in real time. The complaint number matched the board's enforcement log. That was the first crack. Not enough to win yet. Just enough to ruin her certainty. I copied the flagged record, folded it once, and slid it back into the envelope like a loaded weapon. Outside, tires hissed over the parking lot as cars rolled past the courthouse, and every sound felt louder now. Printers whining, a stamp slamming, somebody laughing too hard near the front counter. Melissa had played this like a simple land grab. What she didn't know was that the county wasn't just keeping records. It was keeping receipts. I drove straight home with the folder on the passenger seat and my hands steady on the wheel. The old house sat in the afternoon heat like a stubborn animal, boards creaking in the wind, paint curling at the porch rail. But the minute I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The front hall smelled like fresh glue. I stopped cold. A bright orange notice had been slapped onto my doorframe while I was gone. Violation posted, lien pending, hearing scheduled. Not a warning, a move. I tore it off and read the signature twice. Melissa's name, her board, her authority stamped right on top of my property like she already owned it. That was when I understood the trap. If I ignored it, they'd call me non-compliant. If I fought it wrong, they'd bury me in fees. And if I let anger pick the battlefield, I'd lose before the fight even started. So I didn't go upstairs. I didn't call her. I did the one thing she wouldn't expect from a man she thought she could bully out of his own home. I called the county office back. By the time the clerk answered, I already had the complaint number, the enforcement log, and the date of a prior board forgery in front of me. My voice stayed calm. Mine and Melissa's world were about to split open, and I wanted every word documented. The clerk went quiet when I read the record back to her. Then came the pause, the kind that tells you somebody just realized the paperwork has teeth. She told me to hold. When she returned, her tone had changed. There was a hearing officer involved now. And the board's notice? It had been issued before the county verified the underlying complaint. In plain English, Melissa had jumped the line. I almost smiled. Not because I had won, because she had just handed me a timing problem she couldn't fix. The sun slid lower. Shadows cut across my kitchen floor. I laid the notice beside the folder and looked at both of them like they were pieces on a board she didn't know I was playing. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Last chance to cooperate. Too bad for her. By then, I wasn't cooperating. I was building a record. And once the county sees a board acting outside its authority, the whole lie starts to come apart. By nightfall, I wasn't the man under pressure anymore. I was the man with proof. Dust and old paper hung in the air when I opened the back room at the county annex. The filing cabinet was still warm from the afternoon sun, and the metal handle left a cold bite in my hand. I slid the top drawer open and found what Melissa never thought I would look for. Duplicate transfer notices, owner contact sheets, and a thin stack of letters marked voluntary sale outreach. Funny name for pressure. I laid everything out under the buzzing fluorescent light. One page showed my address. Another had 3 neighbors from our street. All of them had the same strange pattern. Late fee notices, inspection warnings, and then a private assistance letter from the HOA urging them to consider a clean exit before enforcement escalates. That was the part that made my stomach go hard. This wasn't random. This was a paper trail. I heard footsteps in the hall, slow and careful. Then a voice I knew too well. "You're still digging?" Melissa stood in the doorway with her arms folded, that polished smile on her face like she hadn't just been caught trying to squeeze people out of their own homes. She glanced at the files, then at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Real caution. I didn't answer right away. I held up one of the letters between 2 fingers. "Voluntary," I said. That's a pretty bold word for a threat. Her jaw tightened. I kept going, because silence does more damage when you let it breathe. You've been using fines to scare older owners, then handing them off to buyers waiting in the dark. That's not enforcement. That's a scheme. She took one step in, then stopped. Smart enough to know the room had already turned against her. "What you found doesn't prove anything," she said. Too bad for her. I was already one step ahead. I reached into the folder and pulled out the missing piece. A signed internal memo, stamped with the board seal, instructing management to target legacy properties for compliance pressure and turnover opportunities. Her face changed when she saw it. Not fear. Recognition. That was the moment everything shifted. I had proof now, not just of overreach, but of intent. Melissa tried to reach for the memo, but I pulled it back and slid it into my coat pocket. My pulse was steady. My hands were not shaking. She could smell the difference. "This goes to the county," I said. "And when they see how many owners got pushed the same way, they'll know this was never about rules." For the first time, she didn't talk over me. Outside, a car door slammed. Another set of footsteps came toward the annex. Melissa looked past me, then back at the files spread across the desk. Her voice dropped. "You have no idea who else is involved." I almost smiled, because that was the first thing she'd said all day that sounded like the truth. And now I had a new problem. If the paperwork was real and the pressure campaign had been running for months, then somebody higher up had helped build it. The first warning came with a yellow envelope taped to my front door. By the time I reached the porch, the paper was already sagging in the heat, the glue soft as butter. I peeled it off and smelled ink, dust, and something bitter underneath, like old toner from a copier that had been running all day. Inside was an inspection notice, a fine schedule, and a threat dressed up as policy. 30 days. Then escalation. Then collection. I stood there in the evening light with that paper trembling in my hand, and the whole block seemed to go quiet. No birds. No lawnmowers. Just the faint rattle of a flag in the wind and the distant hum of a truck on the road. Melissa had moved from pressure to paperwork. That was worse. A fine can be argued. A lie can be exposed. But a stack of official-looking notices has a way of making neighbors look away and attorneys start charging by the hour. I folded the notice once, slow and flat, and walked inside. My kitchen smelled like coffee gone cold and the lemon cleaner my late wife used to keep under the sink. I set the envelope beside my keys, then opened the folder I'd pulled from the county annex. The complaint number matched. The signatures matched. And now the inspection route matched too. That meant this wasn't random. It was a plan. A sharp knock hit the front door before I could sit down. Not a polite knock. Not a neighbor's knock. 3 hard strikes, then silence. I opened the door and found a man in a gray polo shirt standing on my steps with a clipboard pressed against his chest. Behind him, parked half in the curb lane, sat a white county SUV with no lights on. The man didn't introduce himself. He just looked past me at the house like he was measuring it for a coffin. "Mr. Dalton," he said, glancing at his paper. "Property inspection." I held up the notice. This was just delivered. He gave a thin, tired smile. "Board request." "I'm not in the HOA." His eyes flicked to the sign by my walkway, then back to me. "That's not what the file says." That single sentence landed colder than the night air. I stepped aside and let him in, but only far enough to see what he was carrying. He moved with the bored confidence of a man who had done this too many times and expected nobody to fight back. He checked my porch, my siding, my mailbox, and the length of my driveway like each one belonged to him for the next 10 minutes. Then he stopped at the front gate. A fresh orange sticker was already on the latch. "Violation." I stared at it. "You did that before you came here." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. From the road, I heard another engine idle up slow, then stop. I looked out and saw Melissa's silver sedan across the street. Dark windows, motor running. She was still too far away to be seen clearly, but I knew that shape. I knew that posture. She wasn't here to inspect. She was here to watch. My jaw tightened. So this was the new game. Fines, inspections, pressure in daylight. Not a threat whispered in a parking lot anymore. A public humiliation campaign, wrapped in official stationery and delivered by people who pretended not to know what they were doing. The county man tapped his clipboard. "You'll want to address the listed violations before the next review." "Or what?" He looked at me for the first time with something close to pity. "Then they'll keep coming." He turned and walked back to the SUV. I stood in the doorway, staring at the orange sticker on my own gate, while Melissa's car idled across the street like a patient animal. That was when I understood the real trap. She wasn't just trying to take my property. She was trying to make the whole neighborhood believe she already had. The first thing I smelled was hot asphalt and cut grass, sharp and dry in the late afternoon air, like the whole block had been baked and trimmed just to make the houses look obedient. I sat at my kitchen table with 3 piles spread in front of me. County records, old closing papers, and handwritten notes from neighbors who had been watching Melissa's little empire creep across our street. The paper edges were soft from my sweat. My reading glasses kept sliding down my nose. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere 2 lots over, and every time it sputtered, I thought about how close this neighborhood had come to swallowing my house whole. I wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. I was building a wall out of facts. Mrs. Alvarez from next door had been the first one to bring me her folder. Then Mr. Bishop across the street. Then the retired mail carrier at the corner, who still remembered which homes were here before the HOA signs went up. None of them had ever signed anything binding me to Melissa's association. Some had even laughed when I showed them the orange lien notice. "Never heard of that board," Mrs. Alvarez told me, tapping her thumbnail against the table. "And I've lived here 23 years. That mattered. A lot." I laid out my deed, my title history, and the original subdivision map I'd pulled from the county archive. The chain was clean. Too clean. No HOA covenant. No recorded amendment. No signature from me. No notice sent to my address. No valid transfer of authority. Melissa's paperwork was all pressure and ink, but none of it touched the ground my house was sitting on. That was when I found the copied letter. It was tucked inside a folder Bishop brought over, folded once, then twice, like somebody had handled it in a hurry. The ink was slightly faded, but the signature was unmistakable. My stomach went cold before my brain caught up. It wasn't from me. It wasn't even addressed to me. It was a mass mailing from years ago, sent to owners in the newer section of the neighborhood, and somebody had tried to use it like a noose. I stared at it under the yellow kitchen light while the refrigerator hummed behind me. Melissa had been betting on people not checking the details. Too bad for her. I had started checking everything. By dusk, my dining room looked like a war room. I had maps taped to the wall, sticky notes on every corner, and 3 neighbors sitting around my table, each one ready to swear what they knew. Mr. Bishop pointed to the subdivision line with a knobby finger and said, "Your lot was exempt from the HOA from day one." I underlined that sentence twice. Then I made the call that changed the temperature in the room. The county clerk answered on the 3rd ring. I asked for certified copies of the original plat, the exemption language, and every recorded amendment tied to my address. My voice sounded calm, but my hand was tight around the phone hard enough to make my knuckles ache. If Melissa wanted a paper war, I was about to drag her into daylight. The clerk paused when I gave her the parcel number. "Funny," she said. "We've had multiple requests on that property this week." Multiple. I looked up at the neighbors. They looked at me. And right then, the shape of the trap changed. This wasn't just a bad lien anymore. Somebody was moving pieces behind her. Somebody had enough reach to be asking about my land before I even finished my own record search. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the ticking clock and the low murmur of my neighbors in my kitchen, and for the first time since that orange sticker hit my gate, I felt the fight widen. Melissa wasn't my only problem now. The folding chairs in the church hall scraped the floor like nails on a coffin when the meeting started. I stayed near the back wall, one hand resting on the thick packet in my jacket pocket, the other around a paper cup of coffee gone cold 10 minutes ago. The room smelled like dust, old coffee, and wet wool from neighbors coming in out of the evening humidity. A box fan rattled in the corner, pushing around the same tired air. Up front, Melissa stood beside the folding table with her arms crossed, polished nails, perfect posture, and that smile she wore like armor. She had brought a stack of documents, a glossy folder, and 2 men I had never seen before. One had a city badge clipped to his belt. The other looked too clean to belong anywhere near our street. That was when I knew this wasn't just her bluffing anymore. The meeting had been called to clear up concerns, but the second Melissa tapped her pen against the table, I saw exactly what she meant. She wanted a room full of witnesses. She wanted the neighborhood to hear her version first. "Let's keep this civilized," she said, her voice sweet enough to curdle milk. A few people nodded automatically. A few others looked at the floor. Then she slid a sheet across the table and pointed right at my address. "Mr. Walter has been non-compliant for months," she said. "Unpaid fees, ignored notices, unsafe conditions. We've tried every reasonable path." I felt the room tighten. I had been holding that packet so hard my fingers ached. County records, photocopies, a chain of title, dates, signatures, the kind of paper that doesn't shout, but changes everything. I walked forward before I could talk myself out of it. The chair legs squealed behind me. Every head in the room turned. Melissa's smile flickered, just once. I set the packet on the table and spread the pages out under the fluorescent lights. The top sheet showed the lien notice she had pinned to my gate. The next showed the actual county filing date. The next showed a gap, a big one. Then I held up a certified copy I had pulled that afternoon. This lien wasn't filed against my property until after Melissa's office already sent out notices saying I was delinquent, I said. My voice sounded calm, which surprised even me. And this document right here shows the amount changed twice before it ever reached the county. A murmur passed through the room like wind through dry grass. Melissa laughed once, sharp and thin. "You have no idea what you're talking about." I looked at the man with the city badge. He had gone still. "No," I said, and I turned the page toward him. "Then maybe you can explain why your office number is written in the margin of her internal memo." The room went quiet enough to hear the fan wobble. I watched color drain from Melissa's face. The clean man near the wall shifted his weight. The badge man lowered his eyes. That told me more than any speech ever could. Melissa stepped forward fast, trying to cut the air before it opened too wide. "These are out of context," she said. "He's twisting routine enforcement into a personal attack." That was the moment my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez stood up from the 3rd row. She held her purse in both hands like it gave her courage. "No," she said, clear and steady. "I saw her assistant leave notices on 3 houses that had already paid, mine included." Then Mr. Dorsey near the aisle rose next. "She told my son if he kept asking questions, his lease renewal would disappear." The room changed after that. Not all at once, but enough. People started speaking over each other. A woman by the side door said she had pictures. Somebody else said they had texts. Another man said the same truck had parked outside his house for 2 nights straight. Melissa tried to take control again. but the noise had already escaped her hands. The next morning, a white envelope was taped to my front door so hard the paper had wrinkled around the edges. It smelled like fresh glue and cheap cologne, like somebody had stood on my porch too long trying to look official. Inside was a forced sale notice, neat and polished, with a deadline in bold black type and a signature that made my jaw tighten the second I saw it. Not mine. Not even close. Melissa had gone one step uglier. She hadn't just threatened my house anymore. She had printed her lie on letterhead and tried to make it look like the county already belonged to her. I stood in my kitchen with that paper in my hands, the coffee gone bitter beside me, and I listened to the sound of my own house settling around me. Old wood, quiet pipes, the same ceiling that had watched me raise a family, pay every bill, and keep this place standing while other people around me chased shortcuts and power. My phone was already lit up with messages. She had sent the notice to my neighbors too. That was the part she didn't understand. A deadline can scare one man. It can't scare a street full of people who finally started comparing notes. By noon, my table was covered again. This time it wasn't just records and photos. It was the forged notice, a copy of my deed, a printout of the county clerk's signature archive, and one ugly little detail I had pulled from a public record search at 2:14 a.m. Melissa's company had never been authorized to issue anything on behalf of the property owner. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I called the clerk's office, then the sheriff, then my lawyer, and I kept all three calls on speaker while I spread the papers out like cards in a hand I intended to win. One by one, I asked the same question in different words. Who filed this? Who approved it? And who put her name where it didn't belong? Nobody had a clean answer. That was when I knew I had her. Not because she was out of tricks, because she was finally in a hurry. An hour later, I walked into the county building with a manila folder under my arm and the kind of calm that only comes after you've been cornered so long you stop flinching. The hallway smelled like floor wax and old air conditioning. A copier rattled somewhere behind the glass. Melissa was already there, standing near the records desk in a fitted blazer, talking fast to a clerk who looked like he wanted to disappear. When she saw me, her smile came on too quick, too polished, too late. "Walter," she said, like we were both still pretending. I set the folder on the counter and slid the top page forward. The clerk's eyes landed on the forged signature, then on the county stamp mismatch, then on the for sale deadline she had tried to bury in legal language. The room went still. Melissa reached for the papers, but I stepped in first and held them out of her reach. "Don't," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're doing." That almost got me. Not the threat, the arrogance. So I pulled out the next page. The public notice. The clerk's archive. The email chain showing her office had been pressing for my property file before the notice was ever printed. Now the clerk was staring. The sheriff's deputy who had arrived behind me was staring too. And Melissa, for the first time since this mess started, had nowhere left to lean. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply handed the deputy the packet and said, "Check every page." Melissa's face changed when she realized I wasn't there to argue anymore. I was there to document, to freeze the lie in place before she could rewrite it again. That was my counterstrike. Not a shout, not a scene. Paper, stamps, and proof. The courthouse smelled like old paper, floor wax, and rain dragged in on a dozen different shoes. I stood in the hallway with my jacket still damp at the cuffs, watching people file past the metal detector while Melissa tried to turn the steps of a county building into her stage. She had brought two neighbors, a stack of printed notices, and that same polished smile she wore every time she wanted to sound like authority without ever earning it. But the packet in my hand had changed the air around her. I could feel it. Inside the courtroom, the ceiling fans turned slow and tired overhead. The judge took one look at the file in front of him, then another at Melissa's stack of papers, and the first thing I noticed was the way her fingers tightened around the edges. She knew. I did not speak first. I let the clerk read the filing history out loud. Dates, signatures, notice records, property maps. Every page had something she had been counting on nobody checking. And every page had something else too. A pattern, a gap, a stamp that did not match, a mailing date that landed before the notice was even supposed to exist. Melissa's lawyer stood up twice trying to interrupt, but the judge waved him down like he was brushing away a fly. That was when I slid the photos across the table. My fence, my gate, the orange sticker, the yellow envelope. The truck parked outside my house. Then I placed the certified mail receipt on top of all of it. That receipt was the turn, because it showed the HOA had sent a demand to the wrong name, the wrong address, and the wrong legal owner. Not a typo, a lie, a deliberate one. A murmur moved through the room, small at first, then louder. One of the neighbors in the back leaned forward so fast his chair scraped. Another woman covered her mouth with both hands. Melissa tried to keep her face smooth, but the room was already looking at her like she had just dropped a lit match in a room full of gasoline. The judge asked one question, calm as ice. Who approved this filing? Nobody answered right away. That silence did more damage than shouting ever could. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and steady, under the rustle of paper. Months of pressure, threats, stickers, and fake authority had all been built to make me flinch. Instead, I watched the whole thing start to crack under fluorescent light and public scrutiny. The HOA wanted my house. What they got was a record. Then the court clerk called a recess, and outside in the hallway, the town was already waiting. Not just the neighbors. A local reporter with a camera. A retired county planner I'd never met before. 2 residents who had come in angry and left curious. Somebody had sent the documents ahead, and now copies were moving from hand to hand like a spark. Melissa saw it too. Her expression changed when she realized this was no longer private. No more backroom pressure. No more whispered meetings. No more pretending one person's fear could keep an entire street quiet. But the fight had shifted again, because when the judge came back, he asked for the board minutes. And that meant somebody, somewhere, had to explain why my property had become their target in the first place. The silence after the judge asked for those board minutes was the kind that makes every small sound feel guilty. A chair leg scraped somewhere behind me. Paper shifted. Somebody coughed into a fist. Then Melissa's attorney stood up too fast, like motion could replace an answer. He said the minutes weren't immediately available. Said the board secretary was out of town. Said they would need more time to gather the records. The judge leaned back and looked over his glasses with the tired expression of a man who had heard that exact lie dressed in better suits. Mrs. Harlan filed a lien against property owned by a non-member, he said, tapping the stack in front of him. So I'll ask again. On what authority? That was the moment the room turned on her. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough. The county clerk handed up the chain of title packet my lawyer had submitted that morning. 68 years of recorded ownership. My grandfather's name. Then my father's. Then mine. No annexation agreement. No covenant signature. No dues history. No membership acceptance. Nothing tying my lot to that HOA except Melissa's appetite and a few ugly pieces of paper. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just slid one document after another into the light like he was setting bones. Then came the part Melissa hadn't planned for. The town records officer was called in with the certified copies we had subpoenaed after that church hall meeting. The board minutes she had delayed suddenly existed now that a judge was asking for them under oath. The woman opened the folder, adjusted her glasses, and read the entry that mattered. Special executive session. Discussion of parcel acquisition opportunity. My parcel. Then another line. Pressure through compliance action may encourage voluntary transfer before redevelopment discussions become public. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not fear. Recognition. There it was. In black ink. The part they had hidden behind orange stickers, fake violations, and neighborhood gossip. They had never been trying to enforce anything. They were trying to corner me into giving up a house that had been standing on my land since Eisenhower was in office. Melissa's face lost color one careful inch at a time. Her attorney tried to object, but the judge cut him off. He asked whether the lien had been filed in good faith. Nobody answered fast enough. He asked whether the board had legal jurisdiction over my lot. The silence got worse. Then the hammer dropped. The judge ordered the lien dissolved immediately. He ruled that the HOA had no authority over my property, no lawful basis to fine me, and no standing to threaten a forced sale. He referred the forged filing and the false enforcement notices to the county prosecutor for review. He also ordered a written correction to be recorded so the cloud on my title would be removed from the record. Just like that, the thing they had wrapped around my house came off. I didn't cheer. I didn't look at Melissa right away. I just sat there for 1 second with my hand on the edge of the table and felt the grain of the wood under my fingertips, steady and real, like I needed to touch something solid before I believed it. Then my lawyer nudged the final order toward me. I signed where he pointed. Across the aisle, Melissa looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not harmless, just exposed. All that perfume, all that posture, all that practiced authority, gone the second the paperwork stopped obeying her. Outside, the rain had let up. The courthouse steps were still wet, shining dull gray under a thin slice of afternoon sun. A few of my neighbors were waiting there, the same people who had sat in those folding chairs and finally spoken out when it cost them something. Darnell clapped me on the shoulder. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed my hand. Even Frank, who had spent half this mess staring at his shoes, looked me in the eye and said, "You were right."